Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Carl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion or simply want to ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to invite you to join our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that would resonate with and challenge us and our fellow seekers here in the desert.
We believe that a key to the journey is to keep asking good questions, and we believe that all stories are sacred.
Our hope is that you will find life and healing for your body and mind, and that you will be able to be where you are and be who you are.
And now, here is our show. Hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. I'm Laura Forehand. I am here with Carl Forehand. And did you want to say hi before I jump in?
No, it's
No,
okay.
you're not going to say hi. Okay, great. But I'm really excited about our interview that we have going on. We have Julie Beem and Ginger Healy here from the Attachment and Trauma Network, which I'm super excited about. I've been following their work for definitely the last 2 years, maybe a little bit longer. But so we just wanted to have them on and have just a real good conversation about trauma and attachment.
Little off topic for us on the Desert Sanctuary, but when we start to hear stories of religious things and so on, we get a lot of trauma stories.
Yes.
And so we've listened to probably 250 stories of people that have had trauma. So I guess we really are talking about what we usually talk about.
Exactly. Yeah.
But we're really honored by these guests. I'm almost a little nervous about it.
So funny.
And they're all relaxed and calm, and
it's just conversation amongst friends. But let me tell you a little bit about ATN. Yeah. So ATN is a voice for traumatized children and their families, schools, and communities with membership that reaches around the world. They are the premier support, education, and advocacy system for those raising or educating traumatized and attachment disordered children, remaining true to the vision of their founder, Nancy Spoolstra. And I hope I pronounced her name correctly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. I want to tell you a little bit about Julie first. So Julie Beem has been the executive director of the Attachment and Trauma Network since 2009 and an active member and volunteer since 2005. Julie lives in the Atlanta area and is a mom of 4 and grandmother of 3. Her youngest daughter, who was adopted internationally 25 years ago, was a reason she found support and education from the other parents from ATN. And Ginger Healy started her career as a child abuse investigator, hospital social worker, and school therapist. She spent 15 years as the social service supervisor at an international adoption agency where she learned about developmental trauma and attachment needs in children. She is currently a clinical social worker and the director of programs at the Attachment and Trauma Network. She co-anchors the podcast Regulated and Relational with Julie Beem, who is also the executive director of ATN. And I have to say that podcast is chock full of amazing information. And I also wanted to mention that Ginger is an author, and she has written a book called Regulation and Co-Regulation. And there's also a workbook that goes along with that. I highly recommend those as well. And I do believe, Ginger, you have another book coming out, but I know we're going to get into all that. So let me just start by saying welcome so much to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. I am thrilled to have both of you here. I consider it an honor, really.
Thank you. We're so thrilled to be here. And we do think we're going to talk about what you normally talk about, because trauma is so pervasive and so has so much to do with what happened to you from the very beginning.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So let's start with a couple of definitions. Can you, either one of you, we're just going to leave this freestyle. Whoever wants to answer, perfect. But what is meant by the term attachment? Let's start there, because we talk a lot about trauma, but what do we mean by attachment?
Attachment is that first relationship that you have. It is your earliest relationship that really is all about survival. If you think about an infant when they come into this world, there's not a whole lot they can do for themselves. In fact, they really can't do anything for themselves except cry to make their needs known, right? And if they don't get those needs met, then it is a matter of life and death for them. So they not only want, but they biologically need this relationship with their primary caregiver. And in most cases, that's their mom. It's their mom. And now, because families are getting healthier and more aware, oftentimes it's their dad. I watch my adult children co-parent very much in that realm with how they care for their infants, and each one of them doing the diaper changing and the feeding and the walking and all of those things. But it is that early relationship that is built by meeting an infant's needs over and over and over again, or by not. And then that becomes a not healthy attachment.
So Ginger, can you talk a little bit about that? Because that was going to be my next question. Like, what happens if that attachment is not made, I don't know what the right word would be, properly, or if we see that attachment hasn't been made?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and it's something that I wish we would talk about more often. So I'm so grateful you're asking these amazing questions. What happens in any attachment cycle is this, what we would refer to as an inner working model, a belief system within the child starts to develop. And it can develop in many different ways. So depending on if the need is met regularly, then it starts to build this healthy attachment and a healthy inner working model that forms these beliefs that say, I'm going to be okay because someone is going to meet my needs. Someone is going to answer my call. The world is safe and I matter and I am worthy. Those really core beliefs that we have, that's how and when they start to develop. So the converse side to that is that if our needs are not met consistently, predictably, regularly, then that inner working model gets skewed. And the infant and child starts to develop these views that I'm not safe. I can't rely on anyone but myself. I can't trust anyone. The world is not a safe place. I obviously don't matter. I am completely unworthy. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I do want to throw a caveat in here because when we start talking about this, it brings up a lot of emotions
100%.
and feelings and sometimes for us as parents, guilt, And I want to loudly say that we don't have to be perfect at meeting our child's needs. It's impossible. We can't quickly, immediately answer every cry. And that's okay, because it gives opportunity if we miss a cue to rectify that. And so then that in turn teaches it's okay to make a mistake. Mistakes are normal. Mistakes are human. And this is how we fix it. And so that's one reason that it's okay not to be perfect. There's quite a few reasons. But the other thing is that it's just not humanly possible. And so we shouldn't set ourselves up for that. And attachment research actually tells us that we can meet the needs of our children 30% of the time. And that is good enough. It's actually termed good enough parenting. And good enough means that we can still form healthy, secure attachments and be okay. So there's a lot of hope there. And, there's situations like, take for an example, a medically fragile child who has to be in the NICU of no fault of the parent, of no fault of anyone. We have to save that child's life. But there might be some trust and attachment issues that might need to be worked through later down the road. So, but this inner working model, boy, we could spend hours on that just because a lot of us carry around these let's call them like a shadow message that determines our behaviors. I'm not worthy. That's one of mine. If I really dig deep, somewhere along the line, I walked away from childhood feeling not worthy. And I have to really be aware of that and watch that and understand that, and then move forward from that. And, that's another discussion too, but good stuff. Good, really conversation.
So I assume when that need's not met and things like it will create trauma, right? So that's our next question is, what is trauma? Maybe we go like we did before for Julie to
what is trauma? Oh my gosh, that's such a big question. Those things can cause trauma. What really happens if you don't have a solid inner working model is that it makes it a lot harder for you to be resilient from trauma, to bounce back, right? That you don't, that not having all of your needs met as an infant and having less than a healthy attachment isn't necessarily traumatizing. In a lot of cases it is, because a lot of times we're talking about abuse and neglect, like significant abuse and neglect.
Else, yeah.
But the advantage of those healthier inner working models is that you can be more resilient. If I think I matter, if I think I'm worthy, then I'm going to be able to weather the storm. If I think I don't matter, if I think the world is not a safe place, what the experience that I have is going to be much more likely to impact me as a trauma. And if we look at how SAMHSA defines that the traumas with what they call the 3 E's, the experience, the event, or the event, the experience, and the effect. If we're all in the same event, perhaps, depending on what the situation is, and then how we experience that, is through our own internal lenses and our own internal models. And then the effect or the impact on that on us long term is what determines if something is a trauma or not. If we have there's stress, there's toxic stress, there's that immediate, let's say, a car accident or some one-time event situation that happens. We're all in the same car accident. We all feel that stress. Our nervous systems all respond the same way, but it's the effect of what happens later, beyond that initial, initial rush of adrenaline and cortisol that says how, am I traumatized or not?
Yeah.
And a lot of that is also dependent on what's happened before to us, how often things happen, and also what kind of support system we have around us that helps us work through those things. Because children are less likely to experience trauma if they have a healthy support system, if they have that healthy attachment and the relationships and the people that they can go to and depend on, and people who can, see their stress and help to meet their needs. It's when we're alone that we can really become traumatized. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. I love what you said about resiliency, because I had not thought about that. I kind of was just putting like, oh, no attachment equals trauma, but that resiliency piece makes so much sense to me. So
the reasons we really think attachment is important with trauma, because you don't hear that from everybody, and that's kind of the core of who we are at ATN. One of them is because the attachment helps to build the resiliency. The other thing is what the attachment helps to do in terms of building empathy and compassion. And that's something that researchers are just really sort of, picking up on. Brene Brown is really, really high on that, is understanding that there's compassion and empathy at the core of healthy attachment and healthy relationships. And so, the focus on attachment, we believe, is really, really important.
Yeah. So, and this may go along with that question. It may be totally like I'm just pulling something out of thin air, but Ginger, are there different types or severities of trauma? And if so, like, what leads to that?
Yeah, there are a lot of different kinds of trauma. There could be something acute. Julie mentioned like a car accident. That's like an acute trauma or something that happens, and that's the event. There is complex trauma, chronic, pervasive, where it's just repeated over. We talk about developmental trauma at the Attachment and Trauma Network because that is trauma that is happening while the child is growing and developing. And that is a very different type of trauma because the brain is growing and developing. It is being shaped and molded and wired by experiences, both positive and negative. And so that event and experience, is causing these effects that are different. But it's that whole piece about it happening before the age of 18 as we continue to grow and develop. And I don't even want to just stop at age 18, but the younger you are, those neurons are firing at a higher rate. The brain is just growing and developing. So much is happening. Our nervous system is developing. So children are very vulnerable because of their age, because of resources, support, so many reasons. So there are different kinds of trauma. When we had COVID, we called that a collective trauma because we all experienced it together differently, but it happened to everyone, right? This event. And so there was a collective trauma, there's racial trauma, there's generational trauma, so many different kinds. And it does depend on a lot of different things. I mentioned age and stage. If something is repeated, we often tell the story of like if there was a fire in the school building and you had the fireman and the teacher and the children in the room where the fire was versus the children across the hall, they all experienced the same event, but they would come away from it all very differently because of who they are. And, on the fireman's end, it was a Tuesday, right? But to a very young, vulnerable child who saw it, who felt the heat, that's going to be a different experience. So I think I kind of went around the question, but
But I want to ask, so you guys have both emphasized that there's an event, an experience, right? And then I don't remember what
was it, 30?
Effect.
The effect. Yeah, okay. They made them all start with E's. So effect.
Yeah. And I didn't write one of them down. So something happens, and then either the needs met or needs not met, or I had the ability to cope with it, or I didn't, so on. But I hear in some circles people kind of misusing things like that to say, "Well, then it's your fault." It's not what happened; it's how you took it. And I'm in church. People sometimes say, "Well, you just got church hurt," when it's really church harm. And I think that's important, right? I have another question, but
that's the other piece that you need to understand about trauma is that it happens because of your nervous system. Nobody selects that they're going to be trauma. It isn't, I've just got my feelings hurt. It's more than that. It's my nervous system's response. And that is, it's subconscious. It's not like I can control that response. Right. And I, it took me a long time to figure that out too. Parenting a child, bringing home a child who had been subjected to significant neglect and likely some pretty significant abuse too, as we dug into therapy. But I didn't have any basis for understanding any of that. But I was in a car accident where I actually watched these people hit me. Like I could see them coming in the rearview mirror. And my reaction to that was that I was traumatized. The other people in the car, even some of them that were physically injured, were not as traumatized as I was, probably because I could see it happening, and that whole nervous system response of me trying to, keep it from happening and keep, I was driving and I had my foot on the brake, so we didn't hit the people in front of us very hard. We hit them, but not as hard as we could have. But all of that to say, I couldn't have any more stopped the physiological reactions that I had after that accident than I could have flown across a room. It was that, and I experienced all kinds of things. I experienced sweating, profusely sweating. I couldn't hear the other people talking to me. It was like I was in this tunnel. Once all of the rigmarole from the accident with the policemen and the paramedics checking out the people who had some injuries and things ended, I was on a work trip, and so I took my coworkers and we all went to dinner. Not only couldn't I eat, but I couldn't understand what anybody was saying around the table. And they were telling me things like, well, you should probably call your husband and tell him about the car. And I couldn't make sentences. Mm-hmm. And once I slowly started to come to myself over the next few days, I was amazed at that experience. And I thought to myself, if that happened to me because of one car accident as an adult, all of these children that I know in chronic, complex situations of ongoing abuse or neglect, or even adults who, have experienced those things and never been able to resolve them. It's a wonder they're functioning at all. It's a wonder that they can walk around and do these things, because it truly taught me how little control I had over what my brain was doing in those moments.
Mm-hmm. And I think, Carl, I don't know if this is what you were thinking, but what it brought up for me was that we have to be so careful not to shame one another for what we're feeling physically, emotionally, mentally. Julie beautifully laid out, there was no control. There was no choice. This was her body's response. And that is something that we could just carry with us as we give each other grace in this world, that I believe you. Maybe I haven't experienced it, so I don't know what it's like, but I believe you, because we don't decide, oh, that wasn't a big deal. Why are you making a big deal of it? Or why you should be over that by now. I've heard these type of comments before, and they just really hurt me, because I can't imagine, anyone, that it's such a tough situation to be in. And so the best thing we could ever do to someone is have empathy, and if we haven't been able to walk in those shoes, have that, compassion and grace, and be there for them and believe them.
Mm-hmm. That word believe really sticks out for me, because I know that we have talked about that on the podcast before, because we have people come on and they share their most vulnerable stories with us. And, our job is not to try to catch them or, try to discount them. Our job is to believe them, whether, like you said, Ginger, whether that is our reality or not. It is our job to just believe them and hear them. And we just did a podcast earlier today, and the gal that we interviewed was like, that's the first time I've told my story, and it just felt good to be able to have someone just hear me. Right. Yeah. So I echo what you said. Question is, what you're talking about, like after you had the car accident, Julie, or any situations in your life, Ginger, like, is this our brain and nervous system's way of protecting us? Can you speak to that a little bit?
We have what our body does. Our body wants to protect us. And so it gives us these suggestions or prompts to survive. Mm-hmm. And we call them stress responses. And you've probably heard of fight, flight, freeze. Mm-hmm. But that's what our body does. It sends messages saying you either need to fight this threat, whether it is real or perceived. That part doesn't matter because the body is sensing it as danger. So we can fight it, and our body sends these chemicals into our that dilates our eyes and that speeds up our heart and gives us adrenaline so that we can fight. Or we determine that we need to run away. That's the best way to survive it, is to hide, to flee from the danger. And so, again, the body will give this adrenaline so we can run away and then stay really quiet and hide. Or freeze. That's a response where we need to shut down and play dead. And just, and that can be done in dissociation, in, just freezing, collapsing, fainting, whatever, until that threat or danger is gone. And again, there is a lot of chemicals and hormones going through our body that the nervous system and brain are working together to protect us, to help us survive. And those oftentimes get really misinterpreted. They get judged. Kids all the time get told that they're being defiant, disobedient, disrespectful, manipulative. I have heard it all. Or that they're lazy, not listening, not paying attention, not focusing, defiance. Again, whether it be passive aggressive or we have heard it all. But if we shift our lens and look at it like, what is the behavior trying to tell us?
Right.
It's telling us that oftentimes that they're scared, or there could be a million reasons why.
They don't feel safe.
They don't feel safe. Even if you scan the room and it looks perfectly safe, that doesn't matter. The emotional safety is a whole different thing that we cannot see. And you can look at a kid or an adult and they might be smiling, they might be looking very calm, but if we could open them up and see the anxiety or the stress or the fear, we would treat them differently. And so it does behoove us to just take a step back and go, maybe they're not purposefully trying to hurt me or sabotage the situation. Right. Maybe there is something else going on that I need to investigate, get curious about, or, help create a safe space for them to become soothed and move through this moment.
When you talk about that, it reminds me of like my earlier teaching days when things like that would really irritate me, for lack of a better word, like they're not paying attention to me. They're looking out the window or whatever. And I had to come to a point, and it's when I started like listening to your podcast and trying to do my own research with attachment and trauma. But I realized that it was like striking a nerve in me. Like I had to do some work. Like, because I was taking it super personally, and I needed to look at that. Why am I taking this so personally? And it was very, very interesting and very healing to do that.
Yes.
You kind of go back and you look at maybe some areas in your life where things weren't met. And so which has been so wonderful, because I have it's not my students' responsibility to make sure that I get what I need. Like that's my responsibility to look into that. You mentioned the stress responses, and I thought of fawn too. Julie, can you talk about fawn?
I'm so glad you thought of that, because I wanted to throw that in, because I'm thinking in terms of your audience when you're talking about religious trauma, that the fawn response would be one that might resonate, because it really is about trying to appease the people in power. Yes. And we see that fawn reaction in people who have been abused, that is their protection mechanism of, if I can please the people who I think are in control, the people who have more power than me, then I am less likely to be harmed. And so that, well, Eddie Haskell from Leave It to Beaver. Some of us are old and we remember that, right?
Yeah.
We can remember Eddie Haskell, and he might do some pretty mean things to his the other kids, right? But if he saw I can't think of their name of Beaver's mom coming. He saw her coming, he would run over and help her carry the groceries and like really appease her, right? Whatever she needed, like clean up the yard or whatever it was that she needed, because he knew that that they were the power source. And so he was playing up to them. And some of that is done kind of in a sociopathic way by some people. And that is a problem with trauma and attachment disorders. But some of it is done, purely out of, I've got to be safe so I don't get hurt. And that's what that relational complex chronic trauma can bring forth, is that fawn response.
Can I just ask, I know Carl's just dying to ask a question. I just keep jumping in. I just have one follow-up for that. How as a teacher do I know that a student is not exhibiting fawn behavior? Because I have a lot of, especially girls, and I've taught first, second, and third grade, that will continually come up to me or raise their hand. Am I doing this right? How am I, like needing that constant reassurance? How do I know if that is just age appropriate or some type of stress response?
Okay. It's a little hard because it is age appropriate at second grade.
Okay.
I would meet their needs as much as you're able to, right? And the ones that are the ones that feel like a bottomless pit, those are the ones that the ones that feel like they need it too much, and they're that especially if that goes along with any that they're trying to be overly friendly to you, like they might want to get physically close to you, you know what I'm talking about. Right. That to me would be when I go, I wonder what's going on with this kid. I wonder what happened to this kid. Not that I wouldn't continue to try to meet their needs, because we know that one caring adult can make a difference. So whatever's happening, you can make a positive difference. But I also would start looking to see what you can find out that is going on, and does that help?
Yes, that helps a lot. That helps a lot.
Good.
So I want to try to give like a scenario, and you guys fix the problems with it that I don't explain right. So, a 5-year-old child is traumatized somehow. There's something dramatic happening, or he got left or he got ignored or something as a 5-year-old, whatever. And that he wasn't able to resolve that at 5 years old. He couldn't explain it to himself. No one reassured him when they should have. And it created, stored that in his body, his nervous system. And then later on, when he's 15, and his girlfriend does something that triggers that, or his mom, or that triggers that. And when I was listening to you explain it a minute ago, it's I'm pretty sure I'm right that it's a root brain reaction to that.
Okay.
Like I feel like I'm in danger. I feel scared like I did then. It feels a lot like that. But my root brain, the way I understand it, reacts very, very quickly, almost instantaneously. And even if our minds are 25-year-old minds, the reasoning through this it happens faster than you can reason about it, right? And so my understanding is then our natural thing is to react instead of respond.
Yep.
Yeah. And so we want to talk pretty soon about what do you do about trauma? And I hope we're kind of getting there. But
what do you do about those reactions when you can't respond? Yeah.
So is that a pretty good definition? Is that an example of?
Yeah, I think you got it. I mean, whatever happened to us early, in our early childhood, whatever is in that inner working model, comes around over and over and over again. And if it's positive and I'm worthy, then I walk out into my teenage years as a pretty confident kid, head off to college, head off to my career with some goals set, and things are pretty smooth. But if I don't have those things, it's going to be hard to build on that foundation. Not to mention that whatever that is, and what I think you were describing, Carl, was like abandonment almost. I felt abandoned. So then when my girlfriend does break up with me, oh, holy cow, there I am with all those big feelings from my little self.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, what you do about that is, first of all, recognize it. I mean, Laura described she had to go do her own work, right? And you recognize that that's what's going on. And most of us don't do our own work until we're faced in situations where our inner selves are getting smacked around a lot, right? It's like that we're like, wait, this has got to do with me and who I am on the inside as much as it does with the other person.
Yeah.
What else, Ginger? Go ahead.
Well, we always circle back to safe relationship. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to have a safe relationship that might not end. There could always be a death or a divorce or a breakup, something of no one's fault, but that you have to have something that helps you buffer that moment, that stress, because life is always going to have stress. We're never going to go through life without problems and difficulties. That's the truth, and that's okay, because if we didn't have that, we would never progress. And so it's that we don't get stuck in it, and we have to move through that. And one of the best ways to move through that is to surround yourself with things that help you buffer and shield and protect you, like a good friend or family member, someone safe that creates this space for you to do your work, whether it just be talking through it or moving through it, if it's something small, but that is there for you, because we're just not meant to be alone. And even though, of course, as an infant, we are absolutely dependent on, someone. We get older, we get more dependent, we get more self-sufficient, but the need for relationship, it never ends. Loneliness is a form of starvation. People die of loneliness, of broken hearts. And so we always will. So my number one thing is always say, who's got your back? Who's your buddy? Who can you go to and surround yourself with? And then there's several other things we can do too, but to me, that is your number one safety net. And for some people who may not be able to say, maybe they do feel alone and they don't have someone, there are so many things we can anchor ourselves to, like a pet or something that we would call spiritual, a higher power, somewhere that grounds us and gives us motivation and helps us feel that we have purpose and that we are bigger than this moment, that would keep us going. So, it could be a person, but it could be, for me, my grandmother who passed away, she is still what I would consider like an anchor or a guardian angel, or someone who I know is still there for me, with me, or that I can talk to or think about, or that gives me some solid footing to be able to move through when I get really shaky in my foundation.
I love that, because I consider my mom's mom, my grandmother, that for me. So we're kind of going in this direction, I guess. So I'm just going to ask, are there any like therapies or other modalities that help us with that stored trauma that are beneficial? Or even if, let's say, you're a teacher in a classroom, like what can we do because we're not therapists, we can't diagnose, but what can we do? What types of modalities can we do to help our students, or just help people that we see that might be in some type of crisis or having some sort of trauma response?
Well, I was going to say, you don't need to be a therapist. Take that weight off your shoulders.
Yep.
Therapeutic just means healing. And so you can be a therapeutic friend, a therapeutic teacher, a therapeutic neighbor. You can be that person, that relationship that helps to build resilience in children. So you can be that healing source. I will go back for a second, though, and say that there are some great therapies that I recommend that are kind of focused on healing from trauma. EMDR is one of them. Brain spotting. Those, I would say, top of the line, number one. And there are specific attachment therapies like circle of security parenting and many therapeutic parenting, places and books that we have lists that we are just happy to recommend if you wanted to, attach that in a show note or something.
Absolutely.
But there are also so many exciting and fun and wonderful things you can do as an educator or a paraprofessional or a foster parent, anyone who works with a child. And we talk a lot about co-regulation, which is just meeting those needs and having that safe, attuned relationship where there's reciprocity and creating that safe space. We talk a lot about how to create regulation and soothing, that ability to manage your emotions. That's something we do need to teach children, but we model it.
Right.
We don't just expect it. We don't just teach it and walk away. We create an environment where we're always reflecting that calm, if calm is what is needed. Calm is not always what is needed, but whatever is needed and meet the needs. So meeting the needs of the child, validating them. We've talked about that, believing them, co-regulating, teaching regulation skills. There's so many things. There's a lot. This field right now of trauma sensitivity, trauma responsiveness, neuroscience is really exciting right now. There's new books coming out all the time, and that I think are very accessible and implementable, not over your head, not overwhelming, but like, try this, there's a lot of great examples out there. So
I will say that your book, Ginger, and your workbook are very easy reads. I mean, parents, you don't have to be an educator, which I love. I love that about it. Julie, did I interrupt you? Were you
Great. No, I agree with you 100%. The one thing I want to point out is that when you're doing therapy as with children, that's different than with adults. There are traditional therapies like, let's say, trauma-focused CBT and other DBT, other modalities that teens and adults who've been traumatized can really benefit from. But children, and especially younger children, don't necessarily have the language to describe what's going on, because this is such it's a midbrain response. It's their limbic system that is reacting to all of this, and there's no language there. So things like the EMDR and all the movement things, the somatic things, I've watched powerful drumming circles and other kinds of, just amazing things that are helpful for adults too. But adults can often find therapists who've got some trauma-informed background that are using some of those more traditional modalities, and especially if the adult is, really wanting to heal, when really wanting to work on it, they can make some progress. But because it is a nervous system wound, what we're finding over and over again is that there are a lot of sensory and somatic things that we can do.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Somatic therapies. Julie, you can continue on, or whoever wants to. What is somatic therapy? Because I think I know, and I think I've benefited from it. I'm pretty sure I have, but I may be wrong. I may be a little off track, and I'm Anyway,
Ginger, you want to hop in? Because I don't know if I could define it really like that.
I would actually love to hear your experience, Carl. So you might have to dive into that. But
Yeah.
One of the things that is really hard for kids, we call it interoception, which is knowing what is really going on inside their body or what the body is communicating to them. Something as simple as needing to go to the bathroom or needing a drink or just needing to get up and stretch. Some of these kids, especially if they have been impacted with trauma, they don't recognize those cues. They're often disconnected with their body.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about somatic therapies, we want them to learn how to recognize sensations and recognize what their body is trying to tell them and to be able to listen and practice. It actually takes practice. So within that somatic sensory therapy, there would be yoga and trauma sensitive yoga, because there are some differences there, but anything body movement or recognizing and practicing cues and exploring how it feels. Like, for example, my son, he was really struggling in school. He would often fall out of his chair. He really didn't have good balance and couldn't really feel where he was in space. And we see this with kids that have like sensory integration disorder. And finally, the teacher, just out of, fear for his safety and exasperation, said, why don't you just lay down on your stomach and do your homework if you'd like? And he zipped through it all. Now, that's more of a strategy or a tool or a technique than maybe a therapy, but it speaks to this recognition of our senses and the cues that our body tries to tell us, and being aware of them, that we really, I think, take for granted, a lot of us.
Mm-hmm. I went to recently, and I put this on my Facebook page, Ballivisex
with Megan Baldwin.
That was amazing.
She's amazing.
I mean, I cannot wait to use some of those techniques in my classroom, because I felt, I was doing it. Like, we were just all adults doing it, and I could just feel myself regulating.
Yes.
Doing it.
That rhythm, that repetition, that structure, that predictability. Mm-hmm. My very first time, it sounds really silly or simple, but I just walked away, and I think I was with Julie, and I looked at her and I just said, I feel better. Yeah. That's it. That's all I needed to know, is I feel better, and so that's a powerful tool.
Yes.
So would you put meditations in there, Ginger? Like, I know we've done some really powerful work in guided meditations, because my brain doesn't want to meditate on its own. It gets easily distracted on its own. But with somebody guiding me, and then because this person was talented, she would stop every so often and ask us to reassess our bodies to see what we were feeling. So when you were talking about that, I thought that to me, was powerful, because she was guiding us to a place of recognizing what we were really experiencing at that point.
Because we become so disconnected. So meditation is a way to really ground and get centered and notice, because we often just spend so much time trying to avoid and numb and all the things that is a way to bring us back and safely assess and become aware.
I really like that. I'm totally that same way, Julie. I have to be guided. Yoga, I need to be guided somehow to like sit and do yoga. But how often, to me, it's not a wonder that I might struggle to model this for my students, when I don't check in with my body on a regular basis,
Mhm.
you know, how am I going to? So it's really important, I think, as adults that we learn to do exactly that somehow, either guided or if you are awesome at doing it by yourself. Yeah, I totally agree with you.
And you can just, sorry,
You're fine. No.
I'll just end this thought by saying you can just do some wondering out loud. I wonder if I need to use the restroom. I wonder if I'm thirsty. I wonder, because it just cues them to wonder themselves, because just that whole act of wondering, they may not be able to access it without a prompt. Mm-hmm. And then you can model it. I do need to go to the bathroom. I'm going to do that then. I mean, it sounds so simple. And maybe that's not the exact wording that you're going to do like with high schoolers, but just thinking out loud and talking out loud is a great way to model. I made a mistake. You know, here's what I'm going to do about it. I apologize, you know. So anyway.
Really good points.
Yeah, I would call my experience shadow work, inner child work. But what happened is that I have, you know, since then in therapy and some different things, I've identified things in my past that were big, you know, contributions to all this. But then I became a pastor of a church for about 20 years. And that was a whole new world. And what I found is instead of accessing or working on those types of things, I really didn't have time to deal with it. I didn't know how to deal with it and who could I tell. So maybe it got worse. And especially for my wife, there was a lot of pressure and maybe more trauma from that experience. And so then when I'm trying to decide what I want to do after that, instead of being a pastor, I looked into spiritual direction, and some Benedictine sisters taught me how to relate to my body and to listen. And so on, because for several sessions when they were with me, I would try to impress them by what I had done that week, you know, or whatever. And it just kept, and finally they just, but listen, and they would slow you down and I'd do a body scan and just say, where do you feel it and what do you feel?
Wonderful.
So that's kind of opened me up, but then also, you know, I kind of had a dark night or something a few weeks down the road, because all of those things that have been stuffed down and all those things I hadn't dealt with seemed like they were coming out all at once. Yeah. So, but somebody recommended a book called Bringing Your Shadow Out of the Dark by Robert Augustus Masters. And I read it cover to cover. I was in a hermitage and trying to get this thing figured out. And he said in there to address my younger self, you know, and just, you know, say something like, I got you. I got your back. I mentioned a while ago.
Yeah.
And when that caused a shift in me too, you know, it wasn't like when I was exhausted, but in the years ahead, knowing that was possible, you know, and kind of learning to say, what do I feel? What am I feeling right now? You know, and then I went through a stroke, and Laura and I have had to deal with all of that. But my friend kind of developed that process a little bit. He has a PhD, and he does that kind of stuff. But he kind of refined it a little bit more, where you say a part of me feels, and describe that feeling, right? And then do whatever you would do. Just like if a teacher saw a kid that was losing it, it's probably not a good choice of words, but they would comfort. What would you do? Put your arm around it, say something to that part of you. And I know Dr. Amy does, she calls it parts work.
Yes.
I think it's pretty similar. But to me, those kind of things, sometimes you don't even have to understand what the original issue was, but you're just being with
Yes.
that part of you.
Yep.
And it sounds really simple, but
Well, it's relational. You're giving yourself your own relationship, right? You're relating to your younger self.
Mm-hmm.
Why does that work? I guess I wanted to tell you that whole example to say
You're your own one caring adult. I mean, that's why. I've watched my daughter's therapist has had her doing that to her baby self in therapy, take care of the baby of you, and because when this big feeling is coming up, this feeling is the baby, and like responding this way from what she didn't have, when she was in the orphanage. And it's that whole, being able to parent yourself. I mean, some people actually call it that, I think, in their strategies. And
my therapist says, let's check in. That's what she says.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad I'm going back to a therapist, a trauma-informed therapist. Because there's a lot of people we talk to in religious circles and so on that came out and are just, so against anything like that, any mental health work.
Which is too bad, because I mean, God's in the middle of all kinds of things, and I think He's definitely in the middle of wanting us to heal ourselves in this way. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind.
Yeah.
And I think you bring out another point too, that you don't have, especially for those of us that are working with kids or a teacher in a classroom, you don't know everything that happened to every child, and you don't need to.
Right.
That's right.
If you respond in a relational, in a compassionate way, if you meet, the children's needs, it doesn't matter if they experienced trauma or not, or what they experienced. And it's good for everybody. It works for everybody. It does no harm. And it especially helps those kids slip through the cracks, the silent sufferers that you would have. They seem fine. In fact, they're the ones that sometimes they're your top performers, because they don't want anybody to know anything's wrong. And so it's so good for everyone just to be sensitive and compassionate and loving and relational, because it helps everyone. And I think Carl, the work that you're doing sounds phenomenal, and it sounds exactly right on, perfect. And you don't have to know everything or understand it all. It's that this feels right and is helping, and you're healing, and that's just a beautiful thing.
Yeah. So we've danced around religion today. We probably just need to get past the point of trying to go, well, my church doesn't, or whatever. That there's a lot of issues with religion and trauma. So we deal primarily with that. We hear stories of abuse. We hear people's stories about religion and so on. And I've written some about the fact that, it's kind of like, why didn't religion heal our trauma? And what are the issues that surround religion? I mean, I'm never, it's not really an issue of denomination or what kind or whatever. It's really that there's a systemic something there that we should at least understand better, if not fix or do, but I want to hear from you, as trauma specialist, what should we know? What can you teach us?
I think it's tricky, because there's research, and I'm thinking about what Harvard's research is in terms of protective factors. And one of the researched and cited and faith-based communities. So, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, really, because with religion, especially if it's religion that insists that you follow prescribed rules and doesn't make allowances for anybody who falls outside of that normative box, for the kids that are staring, like in Laura's class, who were staring out the window, and the religious response is to be punitive in that.
Mm-hmm.
That's the opposite of what any human being's nervous system needs.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, having communities, having a potential for caring adults in a church community for children, especially children whose own family lives are problematic, or they are coming from poverty or violence or other things in their immediate family or community, is definitely a blessing, is definitely a miracle when that happens. And so it from my perspective, we get it both right and wrong all the time. I mean, and all I can say is that that's because we're humans, and we're in a lot of cases unhealed humans that are leading in church communities. Now, I'm not talking just about pastors. I'm talking about all of the laity as well. Sure. And it's, if we can't get back to asking ourselves what's going on with this person, and back to that empathy and compassion, then that should be a signal that we're doing it wrong, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think any institution, whether it be a school, a school can be a safe place, where it can be a place where a child gets hurt, right? Mm-hmm. Same with a church, same with a family. There's the good and the bad. Any institution or agency or building or place that is instituting anything fear-based or shame-based or punitive is going to traumatize and cause harm. And, we want to completely avoid that. There's just so much other way. And so there can be a church or a religion that does not, subscribe to fear and shame and punitive. And that can be a healing, beautiful community that supports and is safe. So yeah, it depends. It's definitely not black and white. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We have a I think when things become a business, because we have a deep need for connection. Mm-hmm. And as you guys are both pointing out, there is inherent benefits in community. Mm-hmm. Right. But when the community is kind of like a business, when it opens at a certain time, it has to open, has to close, it has to do certain things, and it has to have a certain amount of money to run. Then that systemic thing means, well, how much time do we spend on mental health issues? Mm-hmm. How much time do we spend talking to each other? Or we just talk for an hour and a half. The systemic things, I think, are the hard things that no one likes to change, and institutions especially don't like to change.
Right.
But I wonder, sometimes if we can just find those simple things, like finding simple ways to have community. Finding simple ways to love your neighbor, and things like that may do more than the billions we spend institutionalizing everything so we can have power, or so we won't be afraid, or whatever the reason is. I think all things like that start with good intentions, and they start to provide the community and things you're talking about. But systemically, there's problem. It makes it much harder to actually keep and maintain that community.
It does. Yeah. And I think the other thing that is hard for us all to, unless we are personally in a crisis. And Carl, you voiced, the crisis in your own career. It's hard for us to realize that we all are on some kind of a healing journey, and that, so we walk around thinking we've got it together, and we don't know why these other people over here don't have it together, when really we're probably one event, one experience away from not having it together. And if we could just look at it as, that the healing and change happens in that community for all of us, and that we get stronger by helping other people and being open to helping those other people, and not lose sight of that. I mean, I think a lot of us show up at church doors thinking that initially, but we lose sight along the way, and we get caught up in the fear and the who's not, behaving appropriately, or who's on the inside and who's on the outside, and all of those kinds of considerations. And that's our own fear and insecurity talking. We need to recognize it.
Yeah.
I gotta say one more thing, because we had it in our earlier questions, and is the reason that we're talking about trauma more now is that we understand it better, or is there just tons more trauma than there used to be, or what? Why are we talking about it so much? And you guys have made some. That's
a great question. Are we talking about trauma because there's more trauma, or are we talking about trauma because we just know more about it and there used to be a bunch of trauma? I would go with that as being the answer. We know more, and I don't think that per person we have any more trauma than we used to have. I don't think we are any crueler to each other, or I think we could point to ways that we can message out to many more people to be cruel, but there were kids that were traumatized 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and there were people who struggled with it their whole lives, and
we burned some of them, and
they were probably not treated well. And now we know so much more about what causes it, what happens in our brains, what helps. I'm glad we're talking about it more.
Do you think, Ginger, you had mentioned that collective trauma of COVID? I mean, because I know when we went back into the school building after COVID, there was a lot of talk about that. So, I mean, could that be part of it as well, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it's we see it everywhere now, and that was just something we could not
see.
Right. And that it wasn't just because it was over or whatever that meant. It was not over, and everybody couldn't deny that, because teachers still will say things are different. Everything is different, and help. We're getting a lot of requests for help and how to help and recognize behaviors in the classroom and where they're coming from and how to assist them. So, and that was just the kids. Now we have this high rate of teacher burnout and teachers leaving the profession, and not being able to find substitutes, and there, so much, but it's different, that's for sure. Things just change, like we have so much social media fallout for teens these days. We just worry so much about teens and what they're dealing with, that we never had to deal with it. So, but that's not that there's more trauma. It's just very different than what I had to deal with when I was.
There's a level of anxiety that seems to be like a normal baseline level of anxiety that we didn't have to deal with.
And I think it goes back to the 3 E's you were talking about, because it's all how we collectively experienced trauma, but not necessarily all in the same way. I had a student in my classroom last year whose dad almost died from COVID. So, I mean, that's the, I
That's
think that's
way different. Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, so I have to ask you this question. Have you guys watched the Inside Out 2 movie?
I was, the whole time we were talking, I just saw that this weekend. Have you seen it, Ginger?
Yes, absolutely.
When those core beliefs come
well
like
done.
bubbling up,
Yeah.
like holy cow!
It was so. It's just an illustration I may not ever get out of my mind.
Yeah,
Loved
very well done. And it just gives us this opportunity to have a conversation about it, with kids, because my kids loved it. And my daughter said, I feel so seen, and so I'm like, tell me more,
Yeah,
so
that's so
I
cool.
love it's a wonderful, wonderful tool. And as a side note, one of the contributing doctors that worked on that film from the social emotional therapeutic standpoint was Dr. Kristen Neff, and she is going to be a keynote at our conference next year. So I can't wait to ask her, tell me all about that, because obviously she was spot on in her recommendations and the writing and the script of those emotions and the impact and how it affected everybody. So super exciting.
Yeah. Her expertise is self-compassion, y'all. So just, I mean, that you can see it in that movie, right?
She's written some books, hasn't she?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
because I've read her books. I cannot think of the titles off the top of my head because it was like 2-3 years ago when I started kind of looking into all of this. So, but she was an author that was told to me, and I remember listening to the books on Audible. So I'll have to look her up again. Yeah.
Brilliant. So really exciting.
Laura and I always ask this question to all of our guests, and we never prepare them we didn't prepare you for anything. We were confident. We were talking to people that knew what they're talking about. So if you had a billboard that all the world could see, I'm going to make it into a poem one of these days, because I think I could pretty easily make a rhyme there. If you had a billboard that everyone in the world could see, what would you write on your billboard? Laura says it could be as long as you want or as short as you want. But if you knew that everyone would see it, what would you want to tell them? And we could edit out.
Yeah, we'll edit out any pause. So take the time you need.
This is such a good question. I need to come up with my own. I've thought of a couple, but it's like stealing from other people, Yeah. But it's one of my most favorite people in the whole world is Sissy White, who has passed on. She's no longer with us physically, but I feel her presence because she's such a world change maker. And one of her two things, she called herself a joy stalker. Like she sought joy so strongly that she stalked it. And I love that. But she coined the term that we use all the time at ATN, which is attachment is the antidote. And that was right during the middle of COVID when we were talking about we need an antidote. And she said, well, the antidote for everything in life is attachment. It's healthy, safe relationship. Yeah. And Julie was the one who came up with Regulated and Relational, which is the name of our podcast. And you can kind of boil down everything in life to that too, that, healthy relationships equal a soothed, regulated nervous system where you can manage your emotions. So see, all of those things would make a great billboard, and they're not indigenously mine.
Yeah, I had thought about the attachment one too, but because people get hung up on what that means, and not that you haven't seen this from other people, but just relationships matter, I think, is probably the core. Just we might as well drive that home because it's relationships matter.
Yeah,
for sure.
They really do.
Now what I want to say is also the relationship with yourself.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's kind of where it starts.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been a thrill for me. We got to meet you guys both in Dallas when we went to the ATN conference, and that was, I mean, I was trying not to fangirl, trying to act like an adult.
You were amazing. We could not have pulled off what we did without the help and support of volunteers, and you guys really stepped up to the plate as volunteers, and we are so grateful.
I have to tell you, like, for anybody listening, ATN, the Attachment and Trauma Network conference, is something you want to put on your list to attend, because it is amazing.
Come join us in February in Atlanta. Not a hard place to get to. Yeah.
Okay. Well, how can people find out more about you, get in touch with you? Tell us all the ways that people can touch base with you if they need to.
Our website is easy. Attach Trauma, ATTACH Trauma, TRAUMA.org. And that will get you about any place that you need to go. You can email us, ginger@attachtrauma.org, julieb@attachtrauma.org. And you can find us on almost every social media known to man, not TikTok, not WhatsApp, not, I don't know, some other random thing, but the biggies.
Yes, the biggies. For sure.
Yeah. And so thank you both for being on. Their names are Ginger Healy and Julie Beem. Ginger's book is called Regulation and Co-Regulation. We encourage you to check that out.
Yeah, definitely. Easy reads. And like, you don't have to be a teacher. I think you guys have made that very, very clear, that this is really for anyone who has or works with young children, parents, foster parents. Yeah, anyone. So this isn't just about teachers in school, although I'm sure they're a big part of your population, but really anyone. Because this is how you guys came about. This was just being moms that needed some support.
ATN's roots. We started in Kansas City, Missouri, so right there down the road from you all.
That's right.
Yeah.
A group of moms and dads who needed support, needed to learn what was going on with their kids of significant trauma. So here we are.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you again.
To the listeners out there, we encourage you, as always, be where you are, be who you are, and be at peace.
Thank you for joining us today on the Desert Sanctuary podcast.
Remember, all who wander in the desert are not lost.
We believe all of our stories are sacred.
We are always here if you need someone to hear your story.
Check out our blog on Pathos and also our YouTube channel.
And stay tuned for our Leaning Forward conference.
Remember, we love you.
And be at peace.